as you go down this rabbit hole, you start to just learn things that are just mind-blowing. But I would argue that the original United States lasted about 95 years, from 1776, and you could argue, 1865 when Lincoln was killed, and then shortly afterwards when they did the Act of 1871, which I don't know if we really want to dive too deep into it, but
yeah, I mean that's what gave the permission for the Federal Reserve and taxation of labor and all the amendments they made to our Constitution. That's what made that allowable.
That's what made it all possible. It turned our country into a corporation. And, Washington, D.C., it's not a state. It's a 10-mile square radius. It's basically owned by a bunch of international bankers. And so there's been quite a few major events. So starting with 1871 and then leading up to 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created, which is a private bank. These are private bankers. This is not
a conglomerate of private bankers. So it's basically a banking cartel.
The banking cartel, the name is misleading. It's not federal. They have no reserves. It has never been audited.
They're not allowed to be audited. What do you mean?
And Woodrow Wilson, our president at that time, he sold us out. And what happened was these bankers were smart, and they've been trying to do this in our country since day one, since 1776. Andrew Jackson was the last president that actually got rid of our second central banking system. Mm-hmm. That was in the 1830s. And so, we didn't have one until 1913. So he was successful for that period of time. And of course, they never give up. They're persistent. And there was a crash in 1907. And so there was people that weren't trusting the banks. And so they sold the Federal Reserve System and used that name to trick people to think that, okay, this is part of the federal government. And they're going to basically make sure that the local banks are not manipulating the currency and in the market and messing with people. That's how it was sold to the people. And then you go into the 1920s where putting money onto a stock was so easy. They had it to where you only needed 10%. So just imagine you want to buy 100 shares of Apple today, and you only needed to come up with 10% of the total value of all those stocks. The bank would finance the other 90%. So there was a huge credit bubble that was being created in the 1920s. And that's why we had the roaring 20s and people were having all these ridiculous parties, and it was good times. And, everybody just believed in the stock market. And these bankers, these big players in Wall Street, they knew what they were doing, and they quietly exited the stock market in October of 1929 and allowed this whole thing to crash. And when it crashed, all these people were left, with stocks that were not worth, anything compared to exactly. And so they had to sell their farms and their land and all that stuff. It was all foreclosed on. So then these
the banks.
Yeah, these bankers came in and they bought everything up, pennies on the dollar. And it was planned that way. And then in 33, Roosevelt, signed that executive order, and then they stole our gold. These people robbed us, and the other thing was in the 20s, there was this middle class that was starting to gain a little bit of political ground. And when the stock market crashed and they lost everything, they were no longer relevant. They were no longer a threat to challenge these people that really had been in control of this country, I would say, since shortly after Lincoln was killed. I think that was a coup. Our country got taken over back then, and there's been a fight, there's been a struggle, there's been good people within our military that have been trying to win the United States back. Mm-hmm. I think John F. Kennedy was the last president that actually truly tried to free us. And we all know what happened to him, Yeah. But the biggest thing for people to look at is the executive order he signed, 11110, which was done on June 4th, 1963, which would have allowed the U.S. Treasury to create silver certificates, interest-free money. Interest-free is the key here. The problem with the Federal Reserve System, and I usually like to do this with like $100 bill. I don't have one handy, but let's just pretend this is $100 right here.
Okay.
But I like to give this analogy just because it paints a good picture so people could understand how their system works. But if you go back to 1913, when the U.S. government took the very first $100 loan out of the Federal Reserve Bank, they had to pay this $100 back plus interest. So there's no other money in circulation. This is the very first $100 bill. How in the heck are they going to pay $100 plus, let's say, 10% back?
Right.
Where does that extra $10 come from? The only answer is they have to continue to borrow more money from this Federal Reserve banking system.
It's a debt-based system that keeps you economically enslaved to it.
Exactly. And by 1933, the United States became bankrupt to the system. And this is how they operate. It's not just the United States. This is what they did in Zimbabwe and all these other countries. You go in there, they bribe the leaders of those countries, with big suitcases of money, or they threaten their family, whatever, they bribe them. And so then they agree, they get on the central banking system, they overinflate their currency, and then they say, okay, Zimbabwe, you guys are in debt to us. How are you going to pay us back? Oh, you know what? We'll just come in and take over all your natural resources. And that was their intention all along, because these things aren't meant to last forever. Eventually they do implode, but it's a way to siphon wealth out of a country.
That's what China's doing to Africa right now.
Exactly. So we got to get out of those systems, which is something I recognized with cryptocurrency, and that's why I'm passionate about it. And it's not just having a currency that's outside of government, but it's the blockchain. I recognized early on that if we wanted to have an honest election, that the blockchain would be a fantastic solution.
Let me correct you. A decentralized blockchain.
Yes.
It has to be decentralized. I mean, there are such things as centralized blockchains. So that's the other thing I like people to understand is the difference between centralization and decentralization, because our problem right now is because of centralization. Blockchain, a way that Satoshi Nakamoto had created for Bitcoin, is a decentralized blockchain, which is a solution against the centralized things that me and Rob are talking about right now. I don't think that we've ever actually recovered from 2008. I feel like we've done a Band-Aid to try to mask the problem and try to make it better. And I think that's what's going to help us have that other crash. And we can get into elements of that. But do you feel like that we have recovered from 2008? Or what do you feel like the status is after 2008 to today?
Well, I don't think there was ever an intention for there to be a real recovery. All they did was kick the can down the road and bought us a little bit more time. I do find it interesting that cryptocurrency, well, Bitcoin specifically, the white paper came out, 2 months after the crash in September of 2008, 2 months later. And so I believe that, I mean, we don't really know who created it, but I believe it happened for a reason. And I believe a big part of the new economy is going to be the blockchain and cryptocurrency, the CTO, which is, STO, security token offerings, all of Wall Street being converted over into some type of token on a blockchain where it's all accounted for. But anyways, going back to your question, all fiat currency has an expiration date. And if you go to Google and type in the average lifespan of a fiat currency, it's 27 years. 27 is the average. We're way past that. 1971 until now, we're way past that. So I believe right on the 50th anniversary, that's when our transition out of the fiat Federal Reserve System into a gold-backed Treasury Reserve System is going to take place. I don't know exactly how it's going to look. I know if people at least plan ahead and you're buying gold, silver, even some cryptocurrency, that's the best you can do. And I think you're going to actually do very well compared to those that do nothing. If you do nothing, one of the ways that this could look is there could be a conversion of, for every 10 Federal Reserve notes, you get $1 of the new Treasury Reserve gold-backed currency.
Right.
That'd be one way to do it. I believe a lot of the debt that we have is just going to be wiped clean. It's going to go to zero. I mean, if we were to pay all the debt back anyways, there'd be no currency left.
Right. Well, you can't. That's what I tried to explain to one of my economics teachers. Like our debt-based system is created to, if you pay all debt, there is no money.
And that's why I like to share that $100 bill example with 10% interest, but there's no other currency yet. So
it makes sense. I like that.
From the very beginning, it's set up to where it's impossible to pay back. So, but that system's going to come to an end. And we've had a group of people that have been steering us towards like a one world government with a one world currency. And their plan to do that has failed. It's failed. You look around the world, countries are moving back towards nationalism, you know, and we're going to, Japan and all these countries, they're going to become independent with their own currency, and it would no longer using the dollar as a world reserve currency anymore.
Right.
Which is a good thing. It's a good
Very
thing.
good thing.
So it's what's enslaving us right now. You know, you have to wrap your mind around this. Income tax, for example. We're working almost 4 months out of the year to pay income tax. Now, I would feel better about it if I knew that my income taxes were going towards building roads or, you know, schools, whatever.
Teachers, what they need to be paid.
But those things are already being collected, number one, from property tax or gas tax or whatever. We have a ton of other taxes. But Reagan already told us in the 1980s that 100% of our income tax is just going towards paying the interest off the money that our government owes to the private Federal Reserve System.
For printing up money that we don't necessarily ask to be printed up.
So what John F. Kennedy attempted in 1963 and what I see happening in 2 years from now, it's going to be a big deal because we're talking about interest-free money. Our government's not borrowing it. They've got the gold, they got the silver to back it up. They're not borrowing it from some third party. So there's no interest attached. There won't be a need for an IRS for an income tax. The income tax passed the same time that the Federal Reserve System passed in 1913.
Taxation of our labor was not supposed to be our founding fathers' goal at all, and where we were at. We were only supposed to be taxed on our goods and services, but taxation of our labor was not supposed to take place. And like you said, 4 months of a year, that's a quarter of your paycheck, minimum. Some people are getting a third of their paychecks taken.
Yeah, so we were turned into collateral. When our government went bankrupt in 1933, the American people were turned into collateral on the debt that was owed to these private banks. And that's why we're paying, 4 months out of the year to people that don't even live in our country. They don't even have our country's best interest in mind. It's a sad thing when you realize that. You're like, whoa, we were born into a system where we're all debt slaves to these people living in, other parts of the world. They're scattered around. It's not just Europe. It's all around other places around the world. But that's what's being fought right now, and I believe we're right at the tail end of it. It's an amazing time to be alive, and I feel good. I feel good because I got to tell you, 2006 was when I first started to wake up to all this. And then I watched Aaron Russo had a documentary, I think it came out in 2007 with Ron Paul, Freedom to Fascism, great film. And that's when I started to get a real good look at what this Federal Reserve System was. And it was starting to look bleak back then, I'll tell you. But not anymore. I see.
It's like a light at the end of the tunnel. I see hope.
I see hope. Me too.
And that's why I wanted to create my YouTube channel. It's why I try to put myself out there. It's why I try to stand up for the things I believe in, try to interview and talk to the people that I'm able to talk to, is because I want to be able to share this with people. I feel led to help make a little bit of a difference. And at the same time, I talk about my practice change stuff. And I really want to take that quote from Gandhi, to be the change that you want to see in this world. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I know I could tell from you, it's what you're trying to do. You're trying to be the change that you want other people to make. But you can only do that by actually taking the action yourself and being the actual change and being an example for other people to see.
Exactly. And, it's been a humbling just experience, just getting, to where I'm at in life, and the people I know I've influenced and have helped. I get a lot of nice, positive private messages from people, and I just try to post truth, and not everybody's there yet to really accept or wrap their mind around a lot of things that you and I are talking about, just because, they're not going to teach us in school our real history. They're not. So when you realize that this country, really, there was a coup in the 1860s, it was taken over, and there's been a battle ever since, but with the bad guys pretty much dominating all the way up until now. It's a lot for people to wrap their mind around. You mean the people on CNN are not actually they're looking out for us? They're just putting out propaganda. Yes, it's propaganda. That's what it is. You got to turn that off. You got to start looking, outside of the.
Check out alternative media, just independent media. Get away from your network television media, because all these companies are owned by just small group of companies, like companies over top 6. Okay, that's what I was thinking. It's a very small number, but all
very
these
top 6.
We're talking not just television. We're talking about print, radio, any form of media that they own. 6 companies, the majority, and it's extremely sad.
These people have got themselves into a really high position of power and control over us, and so their biggest fear, has been losing. They don't want to lose that power, and so all this stuff, all this information that we're being fed with, it's intentional. Our history books, it's not giving us the full truth of what our history is. And George Orwell said it best, in his 1984 book, those who control the past control the future, and those who control the present now control the past. You got to look outside of what's being fed to us through the government, funded educational system. And G. Edward Griffin that you were talking about with the Creature of Jekyll Island, and there's just a laundry list of people we can name that are going to help, I guess, really paint the picture of what really happened and what took place. But it all stems from the Federal Reserve System. That's like the heartbeat of it all. Mm-hmm. It's like the engine of their machine. And as soon as we are able to take that down, I can't even describe it. We're going to experience something that we never imagined in our lifetime we would. We're going to finally experience what it's like to be free. Just imagine not paying income tax anymore and actually keeping, all the money that you've worked for, with your labor. You're supposed to.
Hey everyone, I want to make this quick disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. Always do your due diligence, especially when it comes to cryptocurrency. Never invest any money into cryptocurrency that you're not willing to lose. These markets are unpredictable. They go up, they go down. And other than that, if you're enjoying my videos, please feel free to share them, and I look forward to making the next one.